Imagine for a moment, you're in the dungeons of the Red Keep, surrounded by darkness, when suddenly a voice echoes through the halls, fire and blood. This isn't just a phrase, it's the very essence of one of the most controversial and fascinating houses in all of Westeros. But what if I told you that everything you believe about the Targaryens is a carefully crafted lie? What if the true story behind 300 years of rule was completely different from what we've been told? Today, we're diving into the darkest depths of House Targaryen to uncover the 3 monumental lies that not only upheld their power, but literally shaped the history of Westeros. Get ready, because after this video, you'll never look at Daenerys, Jon Snow, or any Targaryen the same way again. This is a journey that takes us from the smoldering ruins of Valyria to the frozen towers of Winterfell and through the blood-soaked halls of the Iron Throne. You know, when George R.R. Martin created this universe, he wasn't just inventing a medieval fantasy with dragons. He was building a brutal reflection on power, family, and the lies we tell ourselves. And House Targaryen is the perfect embodiment of that psychological dynamic. Every page Martin wrote, every scene D&D adapted for HBO, every whisper of ancient prophecy, it all forms part of a massive puzzle that few have dared to piece together completely. After years of studying Martin's texts, analyzing every detail from the main novels, the Dunk and Egg tales, Fire and Blood, and comparing them with HBO's adaptations, I uncovered disturbing patterns that reveal something shocking. The Targaryens were not the gods' chosen people they claimed to be. They were masters of manipulation, architects of one of the greatest political frauds in the history of Westeros. The first lie that sustained the Targaryen Empire for centuries is also the most intimate and disturbing, the lie of blood purity. You need to understand the psychological depth of this deception. The Targaryens didn't just practice incest, they elevated it to the level of a sacred ritual, convincing themselves and the world that their blood was divine, that they were different from all other mortals in Westeros. But here's what Martin reveals between the lines. This obsession with purity didn't make them stronger. It made them gradually more insane. Every generation born of these bloodlines carried the weight of a growing madness. Aerys II, the Mad King, wasn't an anomaly. He was the inevitable product of centuries of a lie repeated ad nauseum. Can you imagine the psychological pressure of growing up believing you are almost a god? That your blood is sacred? That you have the divine right to rule millions of people simply because your parents were brother and sister? This isn't just a political issue. It's a profound human tragedy. The Targaryens were prisoners of their own propaganda. And here's where HBO's series makes a fundamental mistake in interpretation. It softens this hereditary madness. On screen, Daenerys is portrayed as a just liberator for almost the entire series, with her descent into madness happening abruptly at the end. But in the books, Martin plants the seeds of this instability from the very beginning. Daenerys' obsession with being the last dragon, her growing paranoia, her flashes of cruelty, these aren't random character flaws. They're symptoms of a bloodline corrupted by the very lie that sustained it. Targaryen purity was, in truth, a curse disguised as a blessing. And every time they repeated that lie, they sank deeper into their own destruction. The second lie is even more insidious because it touches on something deep within human nature. Our desire to believe that we are special, that we have a greater destiny. The prophecy of the prince that was promised was not a divine revelation. It was a brilliant political tool the Targaryens used to justify their most questionable decisions. Think about the psychology behind it. When you believe the gods have chosen your family to save the world, any atrocity becomes justifiable. Any war, any death, any suffering can be explained away as necessary to fulfill the prophecy. It's a form of generational brainwashing that perpetuates itself within the family. Aegon the Conqueror used the prophecy to justify his conquest of Westeros. Rhaegar Targaryen destroyed his life and planted the seeds of civil war because he believed he had to fulfill those ancient words. Daenerys burned King's Landing because, in her distorted mind, it was part of her destiny as the world's savior. But here's what is truly disturbing. Martin constantly leaves us in doubt as to whether these people truly believed in the prophecy or whether they consciously used it as an excuse. Rhaegar abandoned Elia Martell and their children for Lyanna Stark. Was that love, prophetic obsession, or simply a convenient excuse to do what he already wanted? The ambiguity is intentional and genius. In the series, that ambiguity is lost. Rhaegar is portrayed as a true believer, a noble man who made mistakes for pure motives. But in the books, there are layers of complexity suggesting something much darker, the possibility that he used the prophecy as a mask for his own selfish desires. The prophecy became a psychological prison for the entire Targaryen bloodline, but it was also their most powerful weapon, used not only to manipulate others, but to manipulate themselves. The third lie is the most pragmatic, and perhaps the most dangerous for the stability of Westeros, the idea that only the Targaryens could control dragons. This myth was the foundation of their political power for 300 years, but that's all it was, a carefully cultivated and brutally protected myth. The truth the Targaryens hid at all costs is that dragons do not obey blood. They obey willpower, charisma, and in many cases, sheer luck or circumstance. Nettles, a young bastard girl with not a drop of Valyrian blood, not only managed to ride, but to genuinely bond with Sheepstealer during the Dance of the Dragons. That should have shattered the entire Targaryen narrative, but they did everything in their power to suppress her story. Now imagine the implications. If anyone with enough courage and determination could claim a dragon, then the Targaryens' divine right to the throne was nothing more than sophisticated propaganda. The entire political system of Westeros was built on a lie that could have been undone by any commoner bold enough to try. But the Targaryens were masters of narrative. They didn't just bury cases like nettles. They built an entire mythology around the supposed bond between their blood and the dragons. Every time a dragon accepted a Targaryen, it was paraded as proof of their divine lineage. Every time a dragon rejected an outsider, it reinforced the myth. In HBO's series, this lie is never really explored. Daenerys' dragons are presented as natural extensions of her power, reinforcing the idea that she is truly special. But Martin is far more subversive in the books. He portrays dragons as wild and unpredictable creatures, beings that can accept or reject anyone, often for reasons that have little to do with bloodline. Now I want you to do an exercise in empathy with me. Imagine being Viserys Targaryen, exiled, humiliated, surviving on scraps in Essos. The only thing left of his identity are those three lies: that his blood is pure and divine, that he is part of an ancient prophecy, and that the dragons, long gone, once proved his superiority. Without those lies, he is nothing, just a traumatized young man with no prospects. Or imagine being Rhaegar, carrying the unbearable weight of saving the entire world on your shoulders because some ancient prophecy said someone of your bloodline would do it. Every decision he makes, every person he hurts, everything is justified by this cosmic responsibility that may not even be real. The Targaryen lies weren't just political tools, they were psychological anchors, giving meaning to the existence of people who otherwise would have to face the terrifying possibility that they were just ordinary human beings with ordinary problems. But here's where Martin's genius truly shines. He never gives us definitive answers about what was calculated manipulation and what was genuine delusion. Perhaps Rhaegar truly believed he was saving the world. Perhaps Daenerys genuinely saw her dragons as signs that she had a divine mission. Perhaps Targaryen madness wasn't only the product of incest, but also the unbearable weight of trying to live up to lies that had grown too vast to sustain. This ambiguity makes the Targaryens both sympathetic and terrifying. They are victims of their own lies just as much as they are the architects of them. Each generation inherits these stories and must decide whether to perpetuate them, to question them, or to be destroyed by them. The impact of these three lies on the history of Westeros is impossible to overstate. Robert's rebellion began because Rhaegar believed, or pretended to believe, that he needed to fulfill a prophecy. The War of the Five Kings happened in part because the Targaryens had been overthrown, leaving behind a power vacuum. Even Daenerys' arrival in Westeros and the destruction of King's Landing were direct consequences of these centuries-old lies. Thousands of people died because one family decided their blood was sacred, that they had a special destiny, and that only they could control dragons. Entire kingdoms were burned to uphold lies that served no one but a single bloodline. But the true depth of Martin's work goes far beyond medieval fantasy. The Targaryens are a mirror of how powerful families in our own world create narratives to justify their domination. How many royal dynasties have claimed divine right? How many empires were built on the idea of racial or cultural superiority? How many wars have been fought in the name of prophecies, manifest destinies, or so-called civilizing missions? Martin is showing us that even the grandest lies eventually turn against those who create them. The Targaryens were consumed by their own fabrications. Their obsession with purity drove them mad. Their belief in prophecy led them to disastrous decisions. Their monopoly over dragons created a dependency that destroyed them the moment the dragons were gone. And this brings us to the present moment in Martin's story. Jon Snow, who may be half Targaryen, consciously rejects many of these family lies. He does not seek power by right of birth. He questions prophecies. He leads through action, not lineage. In many ways, Jon represents the possibility of breaking the cycle of lies that defined his family for centuries. Daenerys, on the other hand, embraces all three lies completely. She believes in her blood purity, in her prophetic destiny, and in her special bond with dragons. And that, according to Martin's logic, makes her dangerous, not only to her enemies, but to herself and to everyone around her. The dragons themselves become symbols of the Targaryen lies. They are beautiful, powerful, and utterly destructive when out of control. Just like the family's lies, grand, seductive, and ultimately catastrophic. When Daenerys loses control of Drogon in King's Landing, she is literally losing control of the central lie that defined her entire life. In the end, the story of the Targaryens is a family tragedy of epic proportions. Each generation tries to live up to impossible standards set by ancestral lies. Each child grows up believing they are special, chosen, divine, only to discover they carry a weight no human being should ever bear. The lies meant to elevate them, instead isolated them, corrupted them, and ultimately destroyed them. It is a parable about the price of absolute power and the consequences of believing in your own propaganda. So I ask you, in a world where family, blood, and destiny determine everything, what happens when we discover those pillars are built on lies? The Targaryens show us that even the most sacred truths can be carefully crafted fabrications, and that the price of discovering this can be the destruction of everything we know. Each of us carries family lies, personal narratives that define us, but may not be entirely true. The question is, do we have the courage to question them, or will we, like the Targaryens, eventually be consumed by them? The three Targaryen lies, blood purity, prophetic destiny, and draconic monopoly, were not just tools of power. They were psychological prisons that turned a family into symbols of both greatness and caution. They remind us that even the most powerful are vulnerable to the stories they tell about themselves. In Westeros, even lies burn like fire, and the Targaryen legacy was forged in three flames that burned so long they consumed the very ones who lit them. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these lies do you think was the most dangerous for Westeros? The blood purity that led to madness? The manipulated prophecy that sparked wars? Or the dragon myth that upheld centuries of domination? Leave your theories in the comments, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our content, and get ready, because in the next episode, we'll uncover something even more disturbing. How the Maesters may have orchestrated a centuries-long conspiracy against all magic in Westeros, and why that changes everything we thought we knew about the saga.